Yeah, Matt.
I just wanted to ask Craig, do you have experience with, like, I didn't get your name, sorry?
Tim.
Sorry. Tristan mentioned ministry in lower socioeconomic areas. You know, where by the time kids reach 13, 14, 15, a lot of them are pretty deep into drugs, trouble, police, that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, a little bit, but more in that kind of context of in Glenmore Park, there is that spectrum, but it's not as pronounced as a place like St Mary's or further west or whatever. But my experience is that the higher up the socioeconomic scale kids are, they are more program responsive. And the lower socioeconomic they are, the more they are non-program responsive. And then that determines the kind of youth ministry you're going to do. You know, all the private school kids, their life is programmed, and so that's natural. Lower socioeconomic kids, their life is anything but programmed, and they just don't respond to that kind of thing. So that changes. So some, but I presume he'll have heaps more experience in that than I do.
We want to help those of you who might be tempted to have a sharp us versus them, the church versus the world, in a kind of combative way, to have a bit more of a, and this maybe touches on Chris's right question about, am I a dinosaur who is out of touch with youth today? We want to help you have a generous approach to today's culture. You know, there's that combination, you've got to be sharp on sin, but also generous with just cultural and generational difference. And that can be, you know, we want to help you with that. Maybe you'll just come away with one or two good ideas. You go, oh, most of it I already knew, but that was a good idea. We'll be happy with that. And then last of all, we do want to help those of you who don't have much. There was someone at the back who said that, who don't have much in terms of youth and young adults ministry. How can we help nurture a kind of cultural space so that over the long haul, you become a church that is receptive to youth and young adults and parents of youth and young adults and keeping, you know, parents of Sunday school kids as they grow up. So they're the things we're hoping to do. Which leads us to point one. Craig, who evangelises and brings youth and young adults? Is it that we just tell the 15-year-old to evangelise their friends at school? Is that all it is? How's it work?
Yeah, I think there are a wide number of inputs for the way youth come into a church. Obviously you have parents with their own children as they grow up. That's probably a key area where you get youth in your church. So if you've got a church that has a thriving kids ministry, that means soon you'll have youth, you know what I mean? So there's that. There is though, the students themselves, the youth themselves will bring their own friends, or that they'll be interacting with a whole number of youth that you won't be. And I think this is the key place for youth evangelism. The high schoolers have so much more connections to high schoolers than I will ever have. And they will see them far more than I will ever see them. And they're at school with them 9 till 3 every day. Whereas I might see them for half an hour in a scripture class maybe, or in the playground for a little bit. And the power of my invite to them is very minimal. But their friends' invite is so much more powerful. And so there is just that conceptual shift that I think, as people thinking of youth evangelism, that we need to make, that I am not the best evangelist for youth. Youth are the best evangelist for youth. My job is to help them be good at what they do and plug some holes or whatever. But my job is to mobilise high schoolers, young adults, to evangelise their friends. Because they'll be there, their friend might never come to my event or walk into my church, but they're with them all the time. That's critical. So you got parents with their own kids, you got youth with their friends, you got siblings. Sometimes, you know, they've got younger or older that they're in communication with, so we're thinking families. And then there's all kinds of other relationships, boyfriends and girlfriends and cousins and aunts and uncles, and there's that matrix.
And some of that with the broader siblings might relate particularly with some of these lower socio-economic areas where it might not be mum, it might be grandma, or it might be uncle that is the one who brings. And sometimes you might need to have a porous, like with me, I was going to a campus ministry as a high schooler because me and my wife as well, Nikki, both we grew up pretty quickly during our teenage years in all sorts of ways. And so to go to a standard church youth group felt, like, you know, it's not true that being grown up is taking drugs and sleeping around, but there is a certain kind of growing up too fast thing that happens that means that it can feel a bit childish plugging into a youth group. And so being able to have enough of a porous barrier to go, actually this person, we can accept them at a different age, or if they're being brought along by older brother or whatever, just pull them into with older brother rather than saying you have to be programmed out is pretty important.
Right. Yeah.
Other things there, and again maybe touches more even still on the low socio-economic areas, is realising that there's also the other touch points of stability in someone's life. And this is where it's a great thing having Christian caseworkers and social workers, Christian skate shop owners and Christian bookstore owners and these Christian teachers, that often the evangelism and the disciple making happens through occasional program attendance, but actually through a network of discipling and edifying, and you go, that's a safe place. Go to that kurong where the guy isn't just trying to sell me stuff, but actually has time in the quiet season just to chat with me, or whatever it is. You know, going to that drop-in centre where there's that Christian guy that I've gotten to know. Those sorts of things, building up those spaces are good. Chaplains through schools that you know, figuring out ways to tie links while honouring the particular government requirements. If it's a state school, there are still ways to draw those lines between local churches and schools. That's another area.
Yep. Can you give some examples there?
Of drawing lines between the schools. I think it's got to do with trying to build out a three-dimensional relationship with the kid and the family. So it's not just, I am chaplain who is inviting you in this kind of blanket proselytizing way, as they say, to the school, but it's actually, no, I've now gotten to know you. And I know you when I see you in the area, see you on the public transport, I've gotten to know your mum or your older brother or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And so within that context then, it's not just a, do you see what I mean? It's not just a, I'm on the school property inviting the kids broadly to youth group, but it's just now going, oh hey, you know, our church has a youth group if you're ever interested. It's that kind of, Dominic still has this great thing where he talks about, you've got to try wherever possible to move relationships from one-dimensional to two-dimensional to three-dimensional. And I think the best chaplains and other kind of social support people are able to do that, so that it's no longer just me with my hat on evangelising you, but it's I've got my hat on, but now I know you as one of the people of the neighbourhood, and I happen to be a Christian as one of the people in the neighbourhood. I think that's how it tends to work. Does that ring true to you?
Kind of. There's a school chaplain that is at church with us, but I think he has pretty hard-line views between what's proselytising and what's not, so he doesn't go anywhere near that line. But yeah, I don't know.
I think we need, particularly in a highly bureaucratic modern Western world, we need to have professional standards, but also acknowledge we are more than just our role. So I'd be pushing back on that and going, yes, when you're in that role, you've got to have hard lines, but you are never just that. You can never just be that. And that's like a doctor who's not human and humane will provide bad health care, because they're also human with emotions and heart and love, and that helps their care of their patient. If they're too professional, that model of the kind of enlightenment rationality, they become poor doctors. They miss things, you know. And so that I'd be probably working with that guy a bit to go.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Well, you're on the right track. That's what I've been encouraging to do there. Yeah, to go. You're also a person. You've got to let that shine through, and that's a different thing there. Yeah. But it's good to realise that because there's all these people work at bringing coaches, social workers, boyfriends, girlfriends, siblings, parents, grandma. When you advertise youth and young adults ministry, you're not only advertising it. I mean, yes, you're right, you're helping the youth and young adults bring their friends, but you can't only market to them. You've got to also prepare marketing and communication strategies to grandma, to mum, to the coach, to the chaplain. You've got to work out, what's my suite, you know, S-U-I-T-E, suite, my collection of inviting tools and communications to help all the different inviters invite, is the thing, rather than just going, the only thing I've got is youth bring youth. Yeah, it's these other things as well. Yeah, cool. Cool, all right, that's enough on that. Any questions on that before we move on? Good. Number 2, and this is the big one we want to hit on, training and mobilising them in evangelism. Number 1, Craig, preach the gospel.
Yeah. At our youth ministry, we run, I don't know if it's unique or if it's not, I don't even know, but every Friday night, our ministry is that we just preach through either Matthew, Mark, Luke or John. So we preach through Mark for 2 years, every Friday, just preach through it. We're currently in Luke, and we'll preach through Luke for the next probably 4 years, I think. Once we do Luke, we'll probably do John or something. We just preach through those on a Friday. This is our youth ministry. I'm not saying that this is what everyone needs to do, or that you should, or that even that it's right. It's just what we do. But we would just preach evangelistically every Friday. And the high schoolers bring their friends, the Christian kids are there, they're bringing their friends, and we're preaching through whatever is next is what we preach. So sometimes the calendar works against us in some ways. You know, we will do every term we kind of try and do a big lightning rod night where you can bring your friends, you should bring them every week, but if you need some excuse, bring them this week. And it's the same thing we do every week, but we just call it something else, just brand it, but it's the same, right? It's just like all smoke and mirrors, it's just the same thing, but with a different label on it. And people invite just to give them that kind of lightning rod. But sometimes we're just up to the bit where John the Baptist gets his head cut off. And that's just in Mark, that's where we're up to that week on the big evangelistic night. And so we preach John the Baptist and we preach evangelistically and do whatever the word says we should do at that week. But that's how we preach week in, week out, evangelistically. Because there are other things that the youth are involved in for their own discipleship. This, I think, is the key for our ministry. Churches for them, small groups are for them. There's discipleship happening weekly in 2 other places for them. And so for us, Fridays is a place where they are on the ministry team, so to speak. They're there to minister to their non-Christian friends or their friends' non-Christian friends as we preach evangelistically. So the key here is, whatever you do, whether it's this or something else, that the way to evangelize high schoolers, this is again kind of like a bit 101, but you need to preach the gospel. I mean, it sounds so obvious, but sometimes people forget it. And the thing that converts high schoolers is the same thing that converts everyone. It's not the preacher or the event or the crowd or the whatever. It's the message of Jesus that converts them. And so you preach it. And you preach the whole thing. I think, like someone said, how we preach the full, undiluted, that's how you preach it. You preach it like that. And so whatever is, my conviction is that every part of either Matthew, Mark, Luke or John is pointing us to the cross and is written with the cross in mind. And so it's legitimate. Any part of, say, Matthew, you can preach evangelistically and it points you to the cross at every point. And so you preach it like that. And so what it does is it gets you get trained in how to preach Jesus in all kinds of different ways. You can't just do, say, penal substitutionary atonement every week, because the passages don't lend themselves like that. Sometimes Jesus is overcoming the evil one, and so you're going to preach different facets of the cross. And like we said yesterday, you're going to preach sin differently depending on the vocab and the tools that are in the text. So when it's crossing boundaries and disobedience, then you explain sin like that. When it's a cup of wrath, you explain sin like that. When it's a rebellion, you explain sin like that. When it's the forces of evil, you explain sin like that. Like, the Bible has lots of ways to do it, and so you just do it however the text kind of tells you to do it. Preach sin that way, explain the cross that way.
A couple of other thoughts. One, I don't know if it applies to youth ministry, but I do find amongst young adults, and I think this is a thing that applies onwards as well, is that if you think we should be evangelistic, therefore we should be only evangelistic. We should be this simple ideal of a middle class, easy to follow 20-minute sermon where we can remember everything that was said and repeat it back straight away. If we go for that, I think you end up with a ministry that's so boring that the Christians don't want to keep coming to it and you don't create momentum. I think there needs to be enough depth and meat in it of some kind, whether it's in terms of narrative and emotional kind of guts, or just other interesting tangents, so that the Christians and the evangelists keep wanting to come. And it's not like, yes, Peter.
So just in terms of that tension between those two things, are you assuming that those in the room are not believers?
Yes. What was the question, sir?
Are you assuming those in the room are not believers?
Yeah, so in the room...
So therefore, are you assuming they don't accept the authority of the Scriptures?
Yep. So the room would be, let's say, on an average Friday in my world, would be a third to a half Christians, and then 2/3 to a half their friends, would be the rough breakup. And so when we would preach, like as I train our preachers, they are to preach to the non-Christians in the room with a word to the Christians, would be sort of a...
So it's not what we believe?
No. It could be. It is, here's what the passage says.
So I would approach, this is again might be a difference of style and approach, but I would similar, except my stance would still be kind of heraldic or announcing. So I'm not there coming in apologetically going, what does the Christian faith have to say? Let's have a look at it together. I wouldn't be kind of always building up the foundation and going, why ought we listen to the Bible? It's got historical credibility. I'd instead go, we're going to look at what the Bible says. We as Christians believe this is God's word to you, and then I will preach as if it is God's word. And then as I go along, I might then go, now some of you here might be saying, is this for real? Surely this is just some random first century person's quirkiness. And then I'd answer I'd step into that tangent and answer that question. But my stance would not be apologetic lecture trying to find a common ground. It would be instead, I'm bringing the word to you, but having the way I'm wording it is such that hopefully it's compelling. Do you want to push back on that at all, Peter? Or?
Oh no, it's a hard one to.
It is.
To pitch.
Yeah. But I think that's helpful. That would be the style, the vibe.
And the other thing I'd add, in addition to keeping the interest of the Christians, to keep them coming to create, because I think the dynamics of church are the dynamics of any Christian ministry. I think what makes church work is what makes evangelistic. People need to keep wanting to come to the thing, to keep giving it and be enthusiastic, and it's the dynamics of church that make that work. So that would be a thing, that often evangelistic ministries that thrive and hum look a lot like church, because that's something of the embodiment of the gospel. The other side of it is that this is my experience as well. Coming in as a non-Christian, my question is not just who is Jesus and what must I do to be saved, but it's also what's the fine print in the mobile phone contract? Once I become a Christian, what do I have to do? That's one of my apologetic questions as an unbeliever. And so preaching the Christian lifestyle is part of helping them get that whole gospel vision that makes it compelling. It's when you show me if Christ be God and died for me, then no sacrifice too great can be, I give my life. That's part of what circles back to go, so this is a big vision of life and what life's all about. It, in a sense, the lifestyle the gospel commands helps make sense of the gospel and commend the gospel. So actually preaching out the Christian life to some extent also in evangelistic ministry over time brings that out. The focus of evangelistic training, 2.2, it's my observation, conviction, that the key thing that your average Christian of any age, including youth and young adults, need is not 2 ways to live and how to door knock and talk to people on the lawns of the park or the lunchtime. Those things are great to learn, and I do teach them, but I don't think that's the key secret to evangelistic training. Because I'm convinced by John Dixon's stuff on promoting the gospel, that all of us are committed to the cause of evangelisation. All of us must be. That's what God's doing now in these last days. But functionally, you go to a church that says every Christian's an evangelist, And not every Christian in that church is being a capital E evangelist. It doesn't. It practically is not the way, and it doesn't scripturally seem to be that way. The key is equipping Christians to be convinced about its truth, passionate about it, willing to come out of the closet as Christians, willing to speak up when things that touch on the gospel get mentioned, willing to share their own story about their own faith. I mean, you guys, the City Bible Forum, your ladder of engaging with non-Christians, that stuff is, I don't know, what's it called?
Oh, yeah, like an action code.
Yeah, the City Bible Forum have great resources that I think apply to any, not just city workers, but youth or anything. It's get to know someone, ask them questions, show interest in them, probe their worldview. Oh, why do you think that? Is that, where's that coming from? What motivated you to become a whatever it is? Why are you doing, all that kind of stuff, and then sharing bits of what you think, and then sharing something of your story, and then maybe you get the permission to share the gospel with them. Maybe you don't feel confident to do that, and you invite the person to come to something to hear, or lend them a book, or send them a YouTube, or whatever it is. I think those two great commandments are a great fuel for the Great Commission. So keep urging people to delight in God and finding things like the preaching we had this morning that stirs the affections, and music, that stirs the affections so that people are refreshed again and go, that's why I believe what I believe, that kind of stuff. So I think trying to work out ways to keep people's spiritual vibrancy high so that they are interested afresh. And I think the other thing is, it's a lot easier to want to keep meeting people if you like them.
Yeah.
If you just want to evangelise at them and feel guilty that you're not, then that's very hard to stay motivated. Whereas if you go, that's another person God made, that has they're a TARDIS, a whole huge universe inside them, of fascinating things, and stirring that kind of, Psalm 104, or delighting in God's world, creates a curiosity in people. So some of that kind of stuff, I think, as the brothers you love people and you delight in God, and so that fuels them and stuff. And then, great, you can then share next.
Great, thank you.
We've had a kind of, this along similar lines, but I've had this interesting observation with our church over the past 3.5 years that the best evangelists, in terms of not sharing the gospel, but the people that are the best at inviting people to church are often the non-Christians. They just say, come along, they're having a great time, they enjoy it, they're not really bored in terms of the gospel, but they see it as a kind of happy, healthy, vibrant place that you want to be, which is interesting because you kind of got to convince the more established Christians that that's also true, but that kind of probably tied up with programs, or tied up with difficult conversations with people after church, or managing a team, or all those things where church becomes more difficult for them and be more of a chore. But it's also the new Christians which are often the best actual evangelists, where they're actually happy to share the gospel with people.
Yeah, and new residents or new seasons of life people new to an area, they build new friendships, and so they've got a fresh go again at all those initial conversations, or a new stage of life, kids going to school, or serious illness, and then building into kind of healthcare communities, those sorts of things.
Yeah. Two thoughts. One on your issue, and then one coming off you. I just need to remember for myself. Simple tools. But one of the things that we find helpful is, everyone knows the way that you keep evangelism high is through praying for non-Christian people. Pretty much everyone knows that. But the thing that is very hard is, how do you get people to pray? That's always the challenge. But one of the things that we've done in our world that has been good, and you can try.
Just to pause quickly on that, are you about to talk more about praying for non-Christians?
Yeah.
Okay. You keep talking. I'm enthusiastic. Yeah, no, I agree.
We do two things in our youth, young adult discipleship. We try and get them every week to be praying for their 3 non-Christian friends. They have more than that, but we kind of say, pick 3 because you can do it. And that's every week as we meet in our small group, we're going to pray for our 3 non-Christian friends. And if we're good, if we can keep it all in, we'll write down some of everyone else's 3 non-Christian friends, and what if we all were praying for our 3 non-Christian friends, and let's see what God does. So just to try and get prayer for non-Christian friends on the agenda, and then what we find is, as you're praying for them, people seem to be more attuned to opportunities with them. Maybe they were already there, maybe they were the result of prayer. Either way, it doesn't really, functionally, it's the same. They're aware and they seem to be able to capitalise on them. The other thing is, we, across church life, maybe half of the church, at 10:02, either AM or PM, our phones, our alarms are set. And at 10:02, we pray Luke 10:2, which is pray that the Lord would send out more workers into his harvest. So across church life, at 10:02 AM, PM,
It's like being an RSL.
yeah, the buzzer goes off,
Yeah.
the thing vibrates, and so we'll be in staff meetings or one-to-ones or whatever, and at 10:02 the phones are off and we just stop and we pray, send out more workers into the harvest. And again, that has been powerfully transformative for our church. That's been maybe the last 18 months or so. And the Lord is raising up workers for the harvest from our church. People who would never be evangelists are evangelizing in a way that is quite extraordinary. So getting people to pray is,
And so to flesh into that, I agree totally. And the counting and measuring, we count what matters to us. That's why we count money, because it matters. Because if we don't have money, we can't pay the staff for the building. We count attendance because it matters. Because if there's not people there to hear the gospel, we can't teach them the gospel. Another little metric that you can have on your dashboards are our small groups praying for their non-Christian friends. You've got to measure that. Do you ever, when you meet with your small group leaders, ask that question? How's the group going? Who's coming? Any questions about the Bible study? Where the group going to be when you're away? Should we multiply? There's all these questions you're asking your small group leaders. How often do you ask the question, have you guys let praying for your non-Christian friends drop off the radar? That's a great little metric question that you can track in terms of tracking health.
Yeah.
And ask them in your staff meetings.
Yeah.
Your team meetings, are you praying, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Let me come back to simple tools. Again, one of the secret weapons that I'm not sure people are heaps aware of is when a person is converted, as soon as possible, even in the same, like we've just prayed the prayer, amen, you're now a Christian, in the same meeting to train them, here's what I just did with you, so that you can now go tell your friends what we just talked about. Or as soon as possible afterwards, in the next week or so, which means that you've got to have the tools need to be simple enough that you can transfer them on almost immediately. So it can't be, I'm a big fan of, I don't know if anyone knows this, Evangelism Explosion, 100-point outline. I'm a big fan of it, but that's way too hard and way too complicated to the tools have to be easily transferable. But if you can have a tool that is easily transferable so that you can say to the person who's just converted, let me train you on what we just did and who could you share this with, who do you know? Like you say, they're heaps good at it. Intuitively, naturally, they haven't grown to feel weird about it.
Yeah, the church planning movement dynamics advocates are wrong in thinking that if you just do a particular system, you'll get in Australia what we're seeing in India or China. They're just wrong about that. It just doesn't, and they haven't. But they're right on this point.
Yeah.
They're right in observing that one of the things those church planning movements do, that we can do, we won't necessarily guarantee the same results, but it will guarantee some results, is basic discipleship is speaking for Christ.
Yep.
With your heart you believe, with your mouth you confess. And so rather than going after you've done several more college night courses and been trained in just for starters and, no, it's basic discipleship. Yeah, absolutely.
And so the tool has to be simple enough
Yep.
to transfer to the person who's been a Christian for 5 minutes. They've got to be able to get it and be able to do it. And then the question is, who could you share this with? It's, again, I think that's one of the secret weapons that we have forgotten about, perhaps, in modern evangelistic apparatus.
And the third point under this training and mobilising is actually genuine Christian discipleship, solid discipleship of godliness, love and delight for God, loving interest in other people, worshipping God in every aspect of life, and so they're giving thanks for God for their sport, for their food, and for their family, growing in godliness, growing in their grasp of Scripture and prayerfulness. Those things do fuel, again, a vibrant seriousness about the things of God. And I think this is kind of touches on, I don't know if we hit this later, but you want to move away from talking about them as kids as a general rule with youth ministry. How much more with young adults ministry? It's a comfort blanket for youth leaders to go, these are kids, I feel a bit protective of them, and it's comfortable for them. They're just kids. Oh, they're young adults, and they're the future. and so we need to treat them as such and expect that of them. We don't want to be contributing to an eternal youth group culture. And so a seriousness about God, an adult seriousness about the things of God, creates an evangelistic culture rather than they're our kids and we entertain them. I mean, you still do have, like, a different stage of life, you have fun things and it's according to the age and the culture, but underneath the kind of, all the goofy games and nicknames and all that kind of stuff, I mean, I'm sure you guys have all experienced something of that somewhere, right? Youth ministries or young adults ministries that both have all the casualness of, I mean, we saw it with Rory this morning. Like, there's a not flippancy, is there? But there's a certain kind of light-heartedness about Rory, while at the same time great seriousness at work together. And that's, I guess, just to simplify the vocab, and that's what we want for the youth ministry.
Yeah. And on that point, right, like we said, if prayer is the driver, then that's just another way of saying real discipleship. Yeah. The way you keep evangelism high, or at least in our world where that it works, is we just keep discipleship high and keep the high schoolers and the young adults on the front lines. That's when you're enthusiastic and excited and energetic is when you're on the front lines. When you're, back sipping tea with the generals is when you kind of get a bit lazy. But when you're in the front lines, then enthusiasm is high and prayer is high, etc. So in our world, we don't really work very hard keeping evangelism high on the agenda in that sense. We don't really, like, our high schoolers, our Christian students come every Friday, and we don't really have to work hard to persuade them to please be here. I think because they're on the front lines, evangelizing their friends, talking to their friends, inviting their friends, praying for their friends, and so we just don't need to do that other thing story happening.
Point 3, engaging with their world. I want to encourage you, if you're leading a church ministry at a different age that you're in, you don't need to somehow pretend you're something you're not and that you're an age that you're not and put your cap on backwards. You don't need to be young and cool and hip, but you need to listen and understand and respect. That's the key things to nail, because that's what's really cool, guys. But there's that kind of thing in the sense that not stand and pass judgment from a distance about those youth with their scooters, their sleeping bags in the way of the bus exits, and all this kind of business. But again, respect them as young adults. They're human beings, young adult human beings, who are soon going to be flying your aeroplanes and operating on your brains. Their issues are their issues, and they're big issues for them. Take them seriously. And you don't need to either be trendy or constantly draw attention to your age and lack of trendiness. We do that, I think, for our own insecurity, and it doesn't come across as, he is old, isn't that nice? It just comes across a bit sad and tragic. They already know you're old, so just leave those comments to one side. It doesn't actually bridge the distance, it just creates this weird awkwardness.
Yeah.
Anything you want to say on it?
Well, I mean, I don't like the high schoolers' music, and I don't watch the TV shows that they watch. I just don't like it. And I don't have to like it, and I don't try to like it. I like what I like, and they like what they like. But like Mikey said, I just try and love them for who they are and respect them and try and understand them. But I'm not trying. I don't watch TV. I don't have any idea what they're doing.
So you can say things like, I asked some of you during the week who's a cute guy or a cute girl that lots of people like nowadays, and you told me their names were this and this. Right. And you can do things like that. You don't have to say, because I didn't know. You just go like, I asked you, you told me this, it's like this.
Yeah.
You can do things like that.
Yeah. Because I think there is this range, and every stage of youth leadership has various advantages and disadvantages. There's the kind of peer, when you're 18, you're more of a peer, and that has advantages, disadvantages. and then you become a bit more like the older brother or sister, then you become a bit like the cool auntie and uncle, then you become more like the mum or dad, and then the grandma or grandpa, and there are just different phases, and there are pros and cons to all of them. The brother-sibling thing is good, but they don't come to you with their problems. Like, heaps more high schoolers come to me with their problems now than they did 10 years ago, because I'm not their sibling peer anymore, I'm a different thing. But they don't come to me, like, we don't hang out.
Yeah. 3.2, some general issues to be aware of. They're growing up in a multicultural world, that's just the assumption. You don't need to talk about other cultures, rather it's odd if you don't. If all your illustrations about London and New York and Sydney and never mention Beijing and Hong Kong and Singapore, they may not notice it, but it's odd. It's just odd for you not to do that. You watch even those now old Batman movies with Christian Bale, those old ones. I remember when I was a kid when they came out. But in them, where are the places that they're going? Where do heroes go now? They go to Singapore, they go to Hong Kong, they're in India. Do you know what I mean? They're not just in London and New York. So just even in the places you reference, you're dealing with the multicultural world. It's not something they're trying to do. I remember talking to Tony Neal when we did a whole Geneva Multiply on multicultural ministry, and he said, this is boring because this is just the ministry, like this is my life. You know, I don't need to be told this stuff, I just am in it. So that's a thing to be conscious of. They are a power and inclusion sensitive world. Yes, identity politics can be self-absorbed vanity at its worst. At its best, it is deeply concerned about the poor and the marginalised, and it's very other person centred. It's not saying, how can I have the freedom to say whatever I jolly well like, but it's how does what I say affect others. It's a very noble thing. So they're very sensitive to power and inclusion. They're socially and ecologically conscious. Decision making is complex and involves massive challenges and often a mix of fear and excitement. Sexual diversity and promiscuity is common, but awareness about the damage it causes is also increasingly a common thing as well. And at least I heard something from America that was saying statistics of promiscuity are actually decreasing and alcohol abuse are decreasing amongst younger generations, perhaps partly for this awareness of the damage it causes. A lot of hurt, pain, confusion, anxiety, abuse, depression, identity questions, and so, amongst other things, being able to non-judgmentally be approached with questions, as well as having forums for question and answer that are anonymous, are very powerful tools to navigate those things. Any comments on that?
No, it's good.
3.3, technology. Also a technological world. I've just got 3 quick observations here. Then we could go on forever. One is, I think we're still in a world where actually there's a great power to do-it-yourself aesthetics. And so that means you don't need to spend heaps on all your media stuff, but do-it-yourself video and simple websites and apps actually have a lot of mileage. So you can save a lot of money on pretty things by just doing them smart and good enough. So that's an interesting thing to realise. Social media, you just got to have those structures in place. And I guess particularly moving a church to be youth and young adult friendly, having those structures just there as just a default. You can't not have them. They're just part of existing. And so it's just a silliness and it's a selfishness to say, I don't bother with those things. You know, I don't. So you just can't do that. And a final thing is, don't take your lead about the culture entirely from what's on television, what's on the radio, what's in the Sydney Morning Herald, what's on the kind of all the sort of television between 6 and 9 p.m. It kind of represents their world, it kind of doesn't. Increasingly, youth and young adults find the angry, furious, anti-Christian extremism from the left to be kind of just in poor taste, a bit cross and intense, and I'm increasingly encountering youth who are actually neutral, if not mildly positive about Christians. And what we hear in the media, and tut-tut about the media and the Herald or whatever, is just not what they're experiencing at all. There's this huge disconnect between mainstream media and their experience to some extent. Attitude to Christianity, 3.4. Christians are daggy was a big thing 20 years ago. Christians aren't daggy anymore, largely. So that's an interesting change, partly through things like Hillsong, and other things like that. It took us a while, but we figured out how to just be normal. And so that's a nice observation in the Western world. The structures, as I said, the media and the politicians to some extent can be hostile, but the substructure is largely curious now for youth and young adults. They know so little, they're a bit like what mainland Chinese students have been like for a decade or more. They know nothing, and so they're kind of fascinated. So I think curious get used a lot now by non-Christian, biblically illiterate, even white students. They'll talk about curiosity about Christianity. Pause there. Comments, questions on point 3?
Yeah, I heard Martin Kringle say recently that it was 9% of Australians don't think we need the church anymore, but the rest are either half ambivalent or positive.
Yeah.
So it was just pointing out, he thought that was a surprising stat, given what impression you get from the media.
Yeah.
You'd think 90% of Australians thought the church had just disappeared.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting stat.
Yeah, and that's important, I think, because it's easy to lose your confidence in as we hear the media so much. It's easy to think that is the majority when it's really not.
Yeah.
And people are heaps more interested or curious, or maybe veneer of hostile, but it's easy to poke through it pretty quick, and then they become very interested very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you need to hear more of that than from the front. Like, I preach too, but from when we preach.
Do you mean stats, that kind of just the
Yeah,
picture?
there's people out there who are genuinely interested. Otherwise, we kind of scare people into silence.
Yeah.
If it's all negative coming from the front.
So Tim's observed Tim, you work with Tim. Craig's observed, working with Tim Shire, that if you approach door knocking the way often we do, well, we're here to tell the gospel. So we knock on the door and say, hello, I'm Mikey, and I want to tell you the gospel. Then we end up in either a not interested or a debate, and they don't come to anything. We'll knock on the door the way you've been doing it with Tim Shire and just go, hi, we're in the neighbourhood, we're Christians, just wanted to get to know you and hear any questions you've got. And the initial stance is no longer this formal, combative thing, but instead it's just drawing near. That's led to a lot more open leads.
Yeah.
And the key thing is to go, look, when I knock on a door, God may allow a fight to become a conversion, to become what's to present this person from it. It might. Largely it won't. Instead just go, I'm just looking for the people who are curious.
Yeah.
And so I go, oh, you're not really interested? No worries. And we just knock on the doors until we find the curious people.
Yeah, we talk
Something about the
about...
stance you take
Yeah.
changes the opportunities you get.
Yeah, we talk about God-prepared people. That we're presuming that God is at work in people's lives, and that we're just trying to find really the low-hanging fruit and talk to them, and we're ready. And it's phenomenal. We can talk about that.
Yeah. Wow, Sam.
Well, Craig, I guess, coming in the youth context, what are the kind of flagship events throughout the year that are tailored specifically towards evangelism?
In my
youth
church world.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I say, so every Friday is our youth ministry, which is evangelistic. And then once a term, we would do something that we would call either Explosion or 2 for 1. But again, it's just branding, and we do the exact same thing we normally do. And then that's kind of it. Like, our youth ministry is not very impressive in terms of its structures. We're investing in the high schoolers to give them simple tools to be able to evangelize their own friends. And then the way we kind of talk about it is, if it's too hard or it's too scary or you need someone to kind of like back you up, then you can invite them here on Friday and we will tell them. But that's kind of it. It's not real.
Like a campus.
Our camp is a discipleship camp.
Yes.
So we take them away in July, and it's really kind of Bible from breakfast until lunch in various ways. You're either reading it by yourself, we're in a session and we're preaching, you're in a small group looking at stuff, and then we're hanging out and being people, the rest of the time. And we'll preach evangelistically on that camp, because there's always non-Christians who come on camps, at least in the West. And every year high schoolers get converted on that camp, largely because of the kind of camp dynamics. You know, they're kind of sleep deprived and they've had too much sugar, and it's all very emotional. So we try not to put too much emphasis on those conversions. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
they're converted, but we're just aware maybe there are other factors at play than just like the power of the Spirit, you know? So that's happening on camp. We'll preach evangelistically, but it's really for discipleship, where if high schoolers are keen for Bible from breakfast until lunch, then come. And if you're a curious, interested non-Christian, they're there and they're into it. But that's not really our camp for the community high schoolers, you know what I mean? We're trying to take our Christian students away, put them in a bit of a hothouse, you know, grow them stronger, make the roots go deeper, and then we'll replant them back into the real world after camp to be, you know, stronger and more beautiful and all that. And then they're going to have a ministry to their friends back home. That's sort of the...
Yeah. What about like at the beginning of the year, do you launch with anything in particular or?
No.
No.
We have week 1 and we're back on Friday, and guys are coming and they invite their friends. I mean, having said this, right, this is a 10-year, at the beginning, 10 years ago, when the youth ministry became largely evangelistic on a Friday, it was a harder road, and there was more challenges from wider church community and parents and people understanding what was happening.
Maybe I can comment on what we do with campus, because it could apply to youth as well.
Yeah.
So we do a heavy survey, the last couple of years, heavy surveying where we just ask them their degree of spiritual interest from 0 to 7 or 1 to 7. We ask them who they think Jesus is, and we have a bunch of options: myth, good man, historical figure, God, son of God, prophet. And then would you like to hear more about our events and activities? Yes, no, or maybe. And then give us your contact details. So just 3 questions that gives us a really good snapshot, but then we follow up all the people who give contact details and not only invite them to things, including just free pizza nights, but also to meet them. I mean, this is whereas there's maybe not the age complicatedness, but to meet them one-to-one and talk more about what we do. And we just try and contact them all one-to-one. And so that launches with a lot of connection, a lot of follow-up, and a lot of free food, as well as our kick-off events. And that's seen that process of inviting people to hospitality-only events, as well as gospel teaching events, has been excellent contact, as well as one-to-one contact, has led to lots of turning cold contacts into acquaintances within the space of a few days, which has been awesome. So that's
just a unique context, right? On the campus, you are trying to create some relationships and connections that don't already exist.
Yeah.
Whereas in the kind of local church context, they all have hundreds of relationships already that we're just trying to capitalize on.
Yeah, Craig, I wanted to ask, so you talk about your youth group kind of being on this 10-year journey, if you like, and the evangelists that you were training up 10 years ago, when they graduated from youth group and into kind of young adult stuff at church, did they continue being evangelists that you've trained them to be, or what does that look like once they left youth group?
Yeah, I have 2 thoughts on that. One is, and I think we're going to say this a bit later on, but I don't think youth ministry grows churches. Or it doesn't grow my church. Because when they hit young adult world, at least in the West, they move away. Because everything is in the city and it's closer and they go elsewhere. Or just, you know, like mum and dad are here and I've always been here and it's time for me to be my own person, make my own mistakes in the world, and they just leave. And that's kind of good and healthy and everything. So they often don't stay in our church, but they go to other churches, you know. So we're trying to think, I'm trying to think in my world that they're never going to stay at my church forever. No one's going to stay at my church forever. I'm not going to stay at my church forever. So the goal is that when they leave, they'll be helpful and fruitful at whatever church they end up at. That's kind of one of the... We want to try and set a big vision for our high schoolers that the goal is that they would impact the world for Jesus. They're going to move away to London and be a mum in America or Hong Kong or some other like non-Anglo place, you know, they're going to do that. And
Not that
so,
London is particularly Anglo, right?
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
you know, so we're going to have a big vision for them. So they're going to leave. That was the first part. But the second part is, while they're still around, then yes, it does. The culture is the same. They're praying for their non-Christian friends. Now it's harder because they see them at uni and they live so spread out. You know, like their uni friends don't live in the streets that they live in, so it becomes harder. And in my world, young adult events don't work as well because the uni friends from like Sydney Uni don't live in the West, they live all over Sydney. So to come to our event in the West, then that's not going to do it. So it's then much more, we're training them to evangelize their own friends. So all the skills that they were learning in high school world and practicing now become much more important, or not important, but you know, like that's it. They're not going to come to events necessarily because they're too far away.
Do you have someone who's involved? I know that you do the young adults ministry at church, but is there a conversation that goes on once they've left youth group that says, okay, like we've been resourcing you and training you at youth group, how are you going, getting feedback each week, how can we pray for you, what are your struggles, what are your triumphs? But then once they get to young adults ministry, they might be saying, oh look, I've got this whole new challenge with evangelism. Is there someone, or is there a space for them to voice those concerns? Or because I think, like in my church context, we do it so well at youth group level, and then when you get to young adults ministry or just young adults life, there's not that space for, hey, I need some help with evangelism, or
Right. Yeah. So all of our young adults are in small groups, which then become much more the regular place for that. And we're working hard. We're not really there yet, but we're working hard for our small groups to move from Bible study groups where we're transferring information and maybe praying if there's a bit of time left at the end, to much more like discipleship, where the group is really laid out more in terms of 3 distinct thirds that we would spend a third of the time in each section. So Bible time would be a third of the time rather than the majority of the time. A bit of prayer again if we can fit it in, to kind of be more discipleship, where all those kind of questions and issues
so it's in that space
can come up.
Sure.
I think to pause on there is one of the most, once you've worked on your programs working well, one of the key things you can do in ministry is work on transitions. So getting kids from Sunday school to become young adults in youth ministry, that transition and working that. And I don't think we have time. Oh no, we might. So these guys even worked on getting grade 6s into their 7 to 9 group to actually facilitate that transition, as well as then ensure that you have penetration into many high. So we'll come back to that. That's a cool move. So that transition from Sunday school to youth, or creche to Sunday school to youth group to young adult and campus ministry. So actually you shepherding as the local church, shepherding them into an AFES group is a huge thing. And another quick thought before we hear about the grade 6 thing is, as this is the separate seminar about adult evangelism, once you get into young adults outside of uni, the dynamics change a lot, and you can't really think, you've got to let go by and large of individuals evangelising individuals and trying to get as many individuals as possible evangelising individuals. Because if you try and do that, you're always going to get frustrated, and you're always going to lay guilt on frustration on them, and the gospel doesn't work and I'm not working. You've got to shift to seeing we are the people of God who together want the gospel to advance. And for some, that'll vastly be godly, give money and parent well, or uncle and auntie well and stuff. For others it will be, we're just members of the church annual congregational meeting that vote in favour of mission decisions year after year and vote for those things rather than be obstructive, and are welcoming to new people when they come and are part of welcoming systems. So we actually help the church pivot to go, I'm no longer the bunch of individuals. A lot of them you'll go forever trying to do that. You've instead got to switch to this whole ecosystem approach, of which some will be evangelists at certain seasons, when they move house, when they move job, when they move life phase, but all of them must keep a concern that the money and the decisions and the structures and the ministries of the church are there for the new people. And that kind of stuff. I think that's the kind of switch you have to make. Yeah, Peter,
Do you mind if I push back against that?
fire away.
I think there is a natural drift that people, as they get older, drift more towards administrative structures.
Yeah.
And if anyone expresses any degree of confidence in a church, will be snapped up and will be,
Yep.
an elder, a warden, whatever your church governance model
Yep.
is. And I think that's a shame because, I work in the city with business people. They have oodles of contacts. One of the questions I ask them is, can you, in 20 seconds write down 30 names of people you know through work?
Yep.
Or it's only a question of how fast their fingers move. So I would argue that loving your neighbour continues, and there are oodles of opportunities for evangelism. And often it's the most unlikely evangelists. People who are very awkward and shy and they're not going to be up front. They have good conversations. So I'd just be careful that we don't kind of outsource evangelism as we get more comfortable, have a mortgage, get settled.
I think it's also easier for people to find excuses than to not. So if you think of it as a whole, it's not my responsibility because I'm serving somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's what I would do. That's my instinct.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I think still, some of that, they name 30 and they go, but my opportunity for connection with them within the context of my work, my personality, my health, the age gaps between me as the junior graduate and a bunch of 40-year-old engineers is just, I could list the names, but really nothing to do with it. Do you know what I mean? So we don't let go of mobilising for some, but I think, and for some it's excuses, but for others they're reasons. And so I guess we've got to be conscious about that as well. The Holy Spirit is in all of us, and we all long and ache for the gospel to go out. And so some of it is reasons, not excuses. But yes, and welcome pushback. And so we don't want to pull that away entirely. And especially for those who are, whether personality gifted or circumstances gifted, even though they're introverted and awkward, we want to be careful about the way we program their time and energy.
We don't want to load guilt onto people.
Yeah, but also mobilise those who go, actually, you know what, you would be great here, but let's not, because you're there, and let's free you up. So thank you for Sam.
Chris and I live north in beautiful parts of Australia. So I'm from Newcastle, Chris is from Foster, and I guess people live, work, play within 20-minute radius. And so the person you work with is also the person you share a suburb with, and it's the person, do you know what I mean? So everything is condensed, which is it's a great advantage in evangelism.
Yes.
How do you think into the western suburbs situation, or it doesn't really matter where it is in Sydney? The most time that you spend with non-Christians is at work. Are there ways in which you try and encourage them to invest back into the western suburbs and relationships there? Like how does that?
We don't really try much to do that. One of our kind of slogans, it's not like it's like a clever thing, but it's just that every disciple is a disciple maker. And I agree that there is diversity in that, like not every disciple maker is a preacher, but we're all disciple makers. And so as they go, that's what they should be trying to think of. So if it's work, then it's work. If it's the kids' soccer thing, they're just trying, wherever they are, to think of who are the people I'm connected with and how might I talk to them about Jesus or find out where they're at with, spiritual things or whatever the question is. But we try and help people to draw what we would call a generational map, which is just, it's them, and then it's all the non-Christian people that they know, mum and the guy I work with and the person at the checkout and the one who always orders the coffee and whatever. And then to try and draw the next generation out from those people too. So who might the guy who makes coffee know? Well, he has his workmates. And then who does my mum know? Well, she's got all. And we try and help to see, what if God what if mum gets converted? What opens up, what worlds open up for her, you know, for us to then move into? Or if the guy who always drives me around in the taxi that I always get, if he gets converted, what worlds open up for us? And we're trying to help our people see they know a lot more non-Christians than they think they do, and they have much more of a reach than they think they do. It's pretty easy to start to get into, you know, Islamic world in the West, right? Well, it's very white where I live, but it's not that hard to get into Islamic world just one generation in. So we're just trying to help our people think like that in the things that they do, whether it's work or home or school or whatever.
Another thought is, I mean, definitely parachurch helps them invest elsewhere, so connecting with AFS if they're at uni a long way away, connecting with city Bible forums and ministries to sports people or whatever it is when they're in those, you know, the politicians, prayer groups and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Connecting with the parachurches and seeing that as part of your larger church ministry that you count and measure and care about is part of it. And the other thing is helping people where they can to build villages and to live in villages. You know, so increasingly now, my dad works for the Heart Foundation, and increasingly town planners are realising the way we build suburbs with cul-de-sacs and no amenities nearby is really bad, among other things, for community welfare and heart health, because you drive everywhere. And so you're not building community. You don't really even talk to others in the cul-de-sac because you can drive into your automatic garage and close the door. And so increasingly town planners realise for physical health, community health, financial health, all sorts of things, building mixed purpose suburbs is really important. And so wherever we can help people kind of proactively try and live in those things where they do, you know, in a sense in the suburbs of Sydney do, or in their workplace and the hub of the workplace go, I'd be better to either go to the gym near where I live or go to the gym near where I work and then try and do a few other things and build this little custom village around my work or around my home, rather than do the best of everything in between work.
Because I think one of the advantages for us is that you're sharing the gospel with a friend at work. He becomes a Christian, or he comes along to our evangelistic program and he becomes a Christian. He's in church next week with those people, and the people who have been praying for him in that growth group, they get to meet him, they see the transformation in his life, and that's a really powerful testimony in the church. But if you're constantly outsourcing evangelism to AFS groups and City Bible Forum and all those things, which is not saying don't do that, but it strikes me it's hard to kind of generate.
It is, yeah. It becomes gospel generous rather than momentum building. Yeah. Let's churn through the things we've got in time. Oh, sorry.
Can I ask a question about the point you made about the shift when they become young adults and we sort of have to realise that they probably won't be evangelists anymore? I get the frustration behind it. Like it's pretty frustrating to lead a church and you kind of want people to go down that track. But what are the theological convictions behind that shift, rather than just like, oh, we're going to get that frustrated, so we should pull back? You know, are there any?
It's rather a lack of a theological conviction that godliness must involve a high amount of time every week inviting to church and personal evangelism. I don't think you can make a strong case that every Christian at every stage of life must be doing that. So rather than an extra one, it's just I'm not convinced that we can make a case that godly maturity at every stage of life for every Christian must be a high proportion of that.
So just say to people, we don't expect you at all to be sharing your faith.
Oh no, I wouldn't say that though. I'd just say that the shift, it's a concern for the spread of the gospel. I still stir that. I say, are there opportunities in your life to still preach that way? Who are the people you can invite? Who are the people that God's given you to love? You know, don't just go to work, get your job done and come home. Can you, as Peter said, that was really helpful to go, God's given these people in your life to love. Are you loving them? You know, so it's still stirred, but I just wouldn't, in the way I strategize and structure, I wouldn't make that question beg that committed to evangelism, loving my neighbour and looking for opportunities for evangelism must mean heaps of non-Christian contacts that I'm inviting and seeking to talk with every week. It looks different. It's often just slower. and all these sorts of things. So just structuring for that pacing. So maybe I overstated it in an unclear way, but it's looking to love, looking to be an active part of my neighbourhood, a warm and loving part of my workplace, a public Christian wherever I am. A win might be just to get someone to a social event that the church runs and lend them something occasionally. It's a different longer game.
But you're not saying the phrase or whatever, preach the word, preach the gospel, use words of necessary, not.
No. So I'm a public Christian, and I want to stir in them a love and a delight to preach of Christ and talk of Christ and speak of Christ and an ache that they don't have more opportunities or long for opportunities. All of those things. Yeah, for sure. Let's churn through what's remaining in the time remaining and just do questions. Does that sound good?
Yep.
So just the notes we've got here. Point 4, vibe and style. Don't necessarily trust youth or young adults with designing and planning the spaces and events that they'd like to come to. They often will do a really kind of gross job of that. Often we can see the spaces they like to be in better than they can, and so we listen, learn, understand, consult them and then do it for them rather than leave it to them themselves. There's, as mentioned before, you're dealing with an age demographic where social, tribal, fun modes of interaction are really key, and so you want to create opportunities that are social, fun, tribal, that facilitate those sorts of things. There's a great power of emotional engagement, and so teaching that emotionally engages the imagination, music, interaction, games that connect, all those things have real power. They need very good quality teaching. I don't know why I've got that there, but they do. They love hearing their peers do stuff, and so I don't know if this is the same with youth ministry, but at least with uni students, they'll bring their mates to some crusty lounge room to hear a first-time preacher preach a sermon. So stupid. Like the space is horrible, the sermon's horrible, but they don't notice any of those things. And so things that involve the giving of testimonies and first-time sermons often in a way that sort of a worker would never go like, how do I trust this? I'm burning a bridge by inviting a friend. No way am I going to risk that bridge on some schmo. Whereas they just don't think that way. Free stuff. I heard someone say the other day, if we gave away free stuff in youth ministry, we could grow the youth ministry quicker. That's a pretty common thing that gets said in our circles. Of course, we don't do that, we preach the Bible. It would be easier if we just gave away free stuff. Free Xboxes, everyone would come. Would everyone come? How many would come exactly? If you could afford Xboxes and they would come and then hear the Bible, why wouldn't you? Like, it's just interrogate that question and go, if you can bring people in a way that's meaningfully generous and relationship building and non-manipulative, through giving away more free stuff, why not divert your resources? If it works, it might not work. But I guess I'm just saying, spend more on evangelism across the board. And we often go, no, we teach the Bible, we don't get people in with other things. But if you can give them free food, and they'll be more likely to come, why wouldn't you be? Yeah, so I guess just thinking through that kind of stuff about spending more money that might create extra just hospitable appeal, if that can be done without breaching ethical issues of manipulation and rice Christianity and all those sorts of things, it's worth thinking about. Point 5, did you have any comment on Bible style?
No, it's good.
Cool. Point 5, creating a whole church ministry that feeds youth ministry. What do you do when you've got nothing, Craig?
Yeah, what I would do, if I had no youth group, I wouldn't start one. I would start a small group, a Bible study group, discipleship group, and get us discipling, praying for our non-Christian friends, and then when the group asked, I want somewhere to bring my friends to, that would be the moment, I think, when I would start thinking about having a youth group. But before that, I'd want to push them to be discipling their own friends, evangelizing their own friends, winning their own friends, and then when the time came, start a youth group. I'm not sure I would start one.
Yeah, a healthy church that has a few youth is a church that says, these are no longer kids that our members bring, these are members of the church. And so it's a good use of our pastor and elders, parish councils and deacons' time to spend time with them as members of our church. So I think that's the pivot to go, hang on, this 13-year-old is a part of our church, and it's not a waste of time for an elder to spend time chatting to them, getting to know them, asking if they're saying, is there anything I can pray for you? little Caleb, and so on. And so actually fostering that. And I think some healthy small churches have that and do it really, really well. And that's youth ministry.
Yep.
You know, and others don't and totally neglect that and need to repent of that sort of thing. Yeah.
Any advice if that happens to be your own child?
If that happens to be, well, I guess you're trying to find spiritual aunts and uncles in the church and try and see if there's a way that they may be just a few years older and be the older brother. They may be an ex-missionary who's in their 70s but has that twinkle in their eye and connect. They're trying to find ways to pair. And it might just not be anything except, hey, after church, could you just always go up and chat to them and show genuine interest in their well-being and comment a bit on the sermon, and while tracking that with your kid to see whether the kid hates it or not. And if the kid hates it, then just be honest and say, hey, to be honest, it's not working. Thank you so much for trying. Yeah, that would be the kind of thing I would think about. When there is something, we need mature parents to endorse the youth ministry or the AFES ministries. You need the parents to be discipling the young people in the home and the church. You need the pastor to be discipling the youth and young adults with applications relevant to being at school, being at uni, being in a friendship group, being on the rugby field, using illustrations that can connect to their world and applications that connect to that world. And you need pastors preaching to parents and aunts and uncles and grandpas about pastoring and raising kids. So actually, when there is something, you need the whole ministry to be the way that you train parents to disciple through parenting and grandparents to disciple through parenting and aunts and uncles, both blood and adopted aunts and uncles, to do that kind of stuff is a really key thing for the whole church to be thriving. You need to realise youth and young adults ministry is a ministry of the whole church. Is a really key thing there. And 6, how youth and young adults relate to the wider church. You've got to get this dynamic right. Don't steal the youth and young adults from the wider church and just build this Goliath of a youth ministry that sucks them all away from creche and Sunday school and band and rosters. No, you've got to have this give and take. But also don't so suck them into the other things, band and creche and Sunday school, that there's no time left to evangelise their friends. So you've got both the dangers, and you've got to watch for both, and especially leaders of the church have got to keep asking that question. Are we creating a Goliath of the youth ministry rather than a system that feeds the whole? Or are we so using youth and young adults as a workhorse that we're not actually mobilising them for mission? And then the broader thing is we need to keep saying to parents, as well as the whole church, to not so structure your life with all the extracurricular activities and study ambitions and tutoring and family holidays, so that we build a culture, that vain culture of chasing after the wind of the over-programmed life.